So, our title for our message, for our theme tonight, or for our meeting tonight, this week, the last 2 days, has been living faithfully. Our goal is to give you, the Christian, ways in which you can live faithfully in all of the circumstances that come about your um, throughout your life. I need the introduction there, CJ. As we mentioned last time, we have many spheres that we operate in, and it's important as a Christian that we live faithfully in each. Many of those spheres overlap each other, such as our family role. In other words, we may be a parent, but we're also a child and a sibling. Tonight, however, our focus deals with how we live faithfully in regards to our work or school relationships, which indeed are very similar. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. And this is our text for this evening. Jesus says in Matthew 20, verses 1 through 16, "For the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is an householder, which went out early in the morning to hire laborers into his vineyard. And when he had agreed with the laborers for a penny a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And he went out about the third hour, and saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and said unto them, Go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right I will give you. And they went their way. Again he went out about the 6th and 9th hour, and did likewise. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing idle, and saith unto them, Why stand ye here idle all the day? Or why stand ye here all the day idle? They said unto him, Because no man hath hired us. He saith unto them, Go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right, that shall ye receive. So when even was come, the Lord of the vineyard saith unto his steward, Call the laborers, and give them their hire, beginning from the last unto the first. And when they came that were hired about the 11th hour, they received every man a penny. But when the first came, they supposed that they should have received more, and they likewise received every man a penny. And when they had received it, they murmured against the goodman of the house, saying, These last have wrought but 1 hour, and thou hast made them equal unto us, which have borne the burden and heat of the day. But he answered unto one of them, and said, Friend, I do thee no wrong. Didst not thou agree with me for a penny? Take that thine is, and go thy way. I will give unto this last, even as unto thee. Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? Is thine eye evil because I am good? So the last shall be first, and the first last, for many be called, but few are chosen." So as we prepare and delve into living faithfully in our sphere, keep these verses in mind as CJ begins our discussion of how we as a Christian are to live faithfully in the realm of as an employee with our employer.
So if you are so how are we in the work setting? How are we as Christians to move and to operate around our bosses? First, our work ethic ought to be different. And servants must work hard. I'll come back to servants, our work ethic is to be different in that we must work hard. Turn with me to Ephesians chapter 6 and verses 5 through 8. Paul says, servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling and singleness of your heart, as under Christ, not with eye service as men pleasers, but as servants of Christ doing the will of God from the heart. Don't do a half job, servants. If you are a servant, if you're someone that's working under someone, say a boss, or really this applies, we'll talk later in the lesson of teachers and students, but this general principle, don't give them eye service. Don't just look like you're doing a good job to get the promotion, but as Christian employees, we are to do them as servants of who? Not servants of our boss, servants of Christ. That's who we are working for. Doing the will of God from the heart, with good will doing service, as to the Lord, not to men. That is why our work ethics are going to be better. We are not just working for whatever employer has employed us. We're working for the Lord. And in the same token, in Colossians chapter 3, Paul makes a similar point in verses 22 through 25. He says, servants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart, fearing God. And whatsoever ye do, do it heartily as to the Lord, not under men. Yes, we are under the influence of our boss, our earthly master, but that's not ultimately who we work for. We are working for the King. That should reflect a work ethic. And he continues, knowing that of the Lord ye shall receive the reward of the inheritance, for ye serve the Lord Christ. But he that doeth wrong shall receive for the wrong which he had done, and there is no respect of persons. Yes, while we are under our earthly boss, it's really the Lord Christ that we're serving. Do it heartedly as you would do it for God. None of us would do a half job for God. Paul says, do it like you were if God was right in the room. As God was in the room, would he approve? Would you change some things if God was standing there over you? If you would, you might have to work on that. In the same token, not only servants must work from the heart, but servants must not be disrespectful. If we turn over to 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 1 and 2, let as many servants as are under the yoke count their own masters worthy of all honor, that the name of God and his doctrine might not be blasphemed. And they that have believing masters, let them not despise them, because they are brethren. but rather do them service because they are faithful and beloved partakers of the benefit. These things teach and exhort. Paul says, even if you are under an unbelieving boss, you should count your master worthy of honor, but even more so if you have a boss that is believing, because you are brothers. Do them your best job. Be faithful and respect them. So not only are servants not to be disrespectful, but we learn from Titus chapter 2 verses 9 through 10 that servants must have a heart of submission. Look over there. Exhort servants to be obedient unto their masters and please them well in all things, not answering again, not purloining, but shewing all good fidelity, that they may adorn the doctrine of God, our Savior in all things. Again, the idea there in verse 10 is when we touched on this last night, but when we are in the world and when we are out and about, we are preaching, we're showing and adorning the doctrine of God. We must be submissive because that reflects the Word of God. And in Matthew 5 and verse 16, Jesus says, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. Our light, we're not just seeking to please our earthly masters. Yes, we ought to, we're commanded to, but we are trying to reflect the light of Christ. If you're doing a good job, if you're honest, if you do good and honest work in your jobs, maybe people will notice the difference and begin to ask why. And you can tell them the reason of the hope that's within you. 1 Peter 3:15. Yeah. And so, in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 18, again, this idea comes up that we need to be subject to our masters. Servants, be subject to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, not only to the ones you like, but also to the forward. This is thankworthy for man, for conscience toward God, and to agree, suffering wrongfully. Peter says, be subject to your masters, not only the ones you like, but most definitely do it for the ones you don't like. Peter continues in verse 20, for what glory is it if then when we be buffeted for your thoughts, ye shall take it patiently. And sometimes in the workplace, you're right and the boss is wrong. You need to take that patiently. Sometimes you need to be corrected. Take that patiently. For even hereunto we were ye called, because Christ had suffered, leaving us an example that ye should follow in his steps, who did not sin, neither was guile found in his mouth, who, when he was reviled, did not revile again. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him that judgeth righteously, who his own self bare our sins in his body on the tree, that we, being dead in sin, should live unto righteousness, by whose stripes ye were healed. Peter says, be subject, suffer the wrong, even if the boss is wrong, be correctable, and also consider the example of Christ. In suffering wrong, you are Christ-like. And he says you are identifying with the suffering of Christ. Christian employees, be subject to your masters, just like in Philippians chapter 2, that Christ was submissive to God, and he came down and became flesh, Paul tells us, and left his glory. Be subject to your masters.
So, having talked to the Christian employees or servants or slaves at that point in time, according to that society, he now turns his attention, or we turn our attention as well, to the Christian employer, the masters of these servants and of these slaves. Paul says in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 9, in his instruction to the masters, he says this: Masters, do the same things unto them. Do what same things, Paul? Well, okay, be obedient to them that are your masters. So even if you're a master, you're supposed to be obedient to those who are over you. You're supposed to do so in such a manner and treat others with fear and trembling in singleness or unitedness of your heart. Your heart should be focused as if Christ is your master, because that's exactly what Christ is. Even though you are a master of men on this earth, you must be a master, or you must give service unto Christ as your master, not with eye service, not with lip service. Don't be men pleasers, but as the servants of God, of Christ. You do the will of God like the servants are supposed to do. Do the will of God from the heart. Remember what we talked about last night, or a couple nights ago, when we talked about how our relationship with God is such that we are to to love God with every fiber of our being, with our heart, mind, soul, strength. That's the greatest commandment. Well, we're supposed to do the will of God with the same focus, the same as that He is our master. Do good. Be willing to do good. Be willing to serve as to the Lord and not to men. Ye masters, do the same thing unto everybody else as the servants are doing to you, knowing that you will receive your reward of the Lord. Forbear threatening. Remember, CJ just read how Christ, when he was reviled, didn't revile again. When he was suffering, he didn't threaten. He told Pilate, I could call, do you not know I could call 10,000 legions of angels? Or 10 legions of angels. My apologies. He didn't threaten. He stated a fact. But even in his suffering, he didn't curse and rail and threaten against those who were doing him wrong. Masters, don't threaten your servants. Don't rule out of fear. Rule out of love and respect. Knowing that your master also is in heaven, neither is there respect of persons with him. There shouldn't be respect of persons with you. It shouldn't matter whether a person is a slave or a servant. Treat them equally. Treat them as you would a free person, as your neighbor. Treat them as you would your God. Christian employer is not to rule by fear. Rather, treat everybody equally and fairly. Colossians chapter 4 in verse 1. Masters, give unto your servants that which is just and equal, knowing that ye also have a master in heaven. That's what we were just talking about. Treat your servants fairly. Treat your servants justly. Treat your employees with all fairness and respect and justice and equality, knowing that ye also have a master in heaven. In our text tonight, what we saw was that the landowner went out at different points of the day, and what did he do? He gave unto each of the hirelings, whether they worked 1 hour, whether they worked 3 hours, or 12 hours, he gave them all the same amount of pay. He treated them all equally, fairly, and justly. And that is our goal as Christian employers. Don't rule by fear. God doesn't rule by fear. He rules out of love. He says, if you love me, keep my commandments. And herein is love, in that we keep his commandments. John 14:15 and 1 John chapter 4. So our goal then is to treat our employees fairly, not railing on them, not chewing them out constantly, not threatening them with termination just because they made my coffee wrong, but fairly, justly, giving them the same chances, the same opportunities as we would expect from God. Next. Is the next one yours or mine?
Mine.
Alrighty then. Take her away, CJ.
So next, maybe we get to something even more practical on a on a more practical level of the work and school relationship. And this can not only be a high school, middle school thing, but it's just in general the teacher and student relationship. Notice what Jesus said. Notice this principle. A student is not above his teacher. In Luke chapter 6, in verse 40, it says, and the disciple is not above his master, but everyone that is perfect shall be as his master. If we want to be a good disciple, we have to understand our place. we are lower than our master. This is true in our school place. This is true of God. God is our master teacher, and we are subject to him. A student is not above his teacher. And then, because we're not above our teachers, we have to, Paul tells Titus that we ought to be, the young man ought to be subject to the authorities. Notice in Titus chapter 3 and verse 1 and 2. Put them in mind to be subject to principalities and powers, to obey magistrates, to be ready for every good work, to speak evil of no man, to be no brawlers, but gentle, showing meekness unto all men. We are to be in subjection. We're not to rebel. We're not to be unruly toward our teachers. We are to respect them. Paul tells Timothy, Titus rather. Paul tells Titus, keep this in mind, put them in mind. And so this is right after chapter 2 where he says the qualifications of the elders. Keep them in mind and be subject. Your respect for the elders should lead you to be subject to them. The fact that God has put them over the flock in chapter 2 will result in you being subject to your elders, to your shepherds, to your teachers. The proper respect of the authority, proper reverence will make it easier to submit to authority. So what have we learned today? Brother Levi's gonna come on here and tell us.
Well, hopefully I'm going to be able to tell us. Even though many of the spheres that we move or operate in overlap, there are unique challenges that face the Christian in his effort to live faithfully to God. We saw how that, we may be a Christian parent, and yet we are also a Christian child and a Christian sibling or a Christian friend. We may be a Christian employer, but we all may also be a Christian employee. For there are times when we do, as a boss, we may be over a franchise, for example, but that franchise owner or the franchise, the developer of the franchise actually still has the power and authority over us, even though we are the owner. So there's different and unique challenges to each one. Servants, we find, or employees must be hard workers because we're working for God. Ultimately, we work for God. Work hard, work respectfully, work in a submissive manner, work in such a way as you bring honor to God and to his word, his will. Christian employers are not to be ruling by fear, but rather are to be working with their employees. They are to be treating their employees with justice and fairness and equality, because their master is God. Ultimately, As a Christian employer, our master is God, and we need to be providing the best service we can to God. And God demands that we treat others as we would want to be treated, Matthew 7 and verse 12. He also says then that as a student or a teacher, teachers have been placed in positions of authority over students. Students then need to treat their teachers with that proper respect. As a bus driver, I can tell you that there are many times that students will get on and they'll have a problem with their teachers. Oh, this teacher is so awful. He doesn't explain anything, or she is so mean. She requires 15 pages of homework every night. Student, you have been placed in a position under that teacher. Treat her or him with the respect that you would treat God, because God has placed them over you. So you are to remember that you do not know more than your teacher. You are to remind them, we are to remind each other, especially our younger students, such as O'Shea, for example, or CJ, who's in his final year of schooling, to be subject to their authorities and to do their work in the same manner as a servant or an employee is to do their work. Be consistent. If we are to live faithfully, that we are letting our light shine, we need to, no matter the relationship, realize that God is our employer. God is our master. God is over all. Whether it is our relationship with our employers or we are the employers, we have a responsibility to carry out. No, not just to carry out. We have a responsibility to live out Christ in every action and light, our light, and to let our light shine, that they may see God, Matthew 5:16. Even if we're too young to be employed, there is still that same responsibility to carry out our work in such a manner as is respectful to those who are in authority. Children, obey your parents. Students, obey your teachers in the Lord, for this is right. If we go back and we look again as we enter into the realm of education, this duty is to be first and foremost. Check out Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 13 and 14 with me. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 13 and 14, one of the most famous passages of the entire book of Ecclesiastes. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter, the preacher says. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Man, your responsibility, regardless of the sphere that you are operating in, is to fear God and keep his commandments. Remember, God shall bring every work into judgment. With every secret thing, whether it be good or evil, it's going to come to light. Our duty is to be first and foremost to be keeping God's commandments, because we reverence God. We love God. To think, to speak, act in accordance to the principles of God, as we saw in Titus chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. Let's look at that one more time. Put them in mind. Put who in mind, Paul? Paul's talking to the young man, the young preacher Titus, and he says, what? Servants in chapter 2 and verse 9, young men in chapter 2 and verse 6, young women, chapter 2 and verse 4, aged women, chapter 2 and verse 3, aged men, chapter 2 and verse 2. Put them all in mind to be subject to principalities and powers, to obey magistrates, those who are in authority over us, to be ready to every good work. Notice also, he says, speak evil of no man. That's what we're supposed to do as Christians when we live faithfully. Many times in the job, in my job, whether it has been as a convenience store clerk, or it's been as a union steward in one of the places I worked at, or it's been in any of the other jobs out there that I've worked, many times I've heard people complaining about their jobs, about their bosses, or about their employers, or their employees, or their fellow employees. Speak evil of no man. Don't be brawlers, but be gentle, showing all meekness. That word meekness, strength under control. You have the strength. You are a child of God. But control yourself, just like our example from Titus chapter 2. Our Savior, Jesus Christ, gave himself for us, that he might redeem us from all iniquity and purify unto himself a peculiar people, zealous of good works. These are the things that we are to speak and exhort and rebuke with all authority. These are the things we're supposed to be doing. Follow after Christ, showing meekness to all men, being gentle, not brawlers, not quick to a fight, not speakers of evil things. Live faithfully unto Christ. Live faithfully unto God, and let God and Christ show forth from your life. Matthew chapter 5, verse 12 through 14, or 14 through 16, excuse me. Our prayer and aim is tonight that we might have given you something whereby you can take and be better servants of God. That perhaps there was something in there that you might have not considered. Or there might be something that you, as a Christian, might have been overlooking in your walk, and you might be able to make it right. That is our prayer and our aim.